Hey guys, welcome to Bible 365. I'm your host, Kathy Carter, and I'm bringing you Hebrews 5. And we're going with this theme that we've heard before about being in the milk versus being in the meat, right? It's like, so where are you in your foundation of understanding the word? Are you still a babe in Christ, or are you someone that is understanding of discerning of good and evil? So if you're interested, I want you to stick with me, and I'll see you guys in just a minute. Hey, welcome to Bible 365. I am your host, Kathy Carter, and this channel is here to kind of merge Bible living with Bible literacy. So, we are going to be using the New Testament this year in order to understand what it's like to live as a follower of Christ. I have a link below in the description that I have a download that will bring you to a chronological Bible reading of the New Testament. So, what I want you to do is read every day and join me and hopefully some friends as we talk about what it means to live as a kingdom builder. Let's get started. Hey guys, and welcome back. This is Hebrews 5 today. If you've never been here before, I would love for you to go back to Hebrews 1 because you missed some information. So it just always helps to go back to the beginning of a letter. And of course, if you want to go back to the beginning of the year where we start New Testament, that would be awesome. So today we are moving on. This is a letter that is written by an unknown author. And I think it's extremely deliberate. So I'm one of those people who definitely believes that that the word of God, like he gave us the information he wants us to know. And so there's a reason that this information, this author has been left out. And not only has the author been left out, it's not like it's a name that we didn't know who it was, or they gave you just like a hidden that it could be this person. Like there's a letter from John, and he says to the elder lady, right? Like we don't necessarily know the name. There are some things in here that says the lady. We don't necessarily know who or what they are. This one, the whole greeting was left out, and the whole ending is sort of left out. Like it seems to be a letter, but it's not addressed to anyone, and it's not from anyone, which means it seems like it was deliberately taken out. Now, I could be over exaggerating it, and that's fine. That's just what it seems like to me. So we don't know who the author is. We can't find out any historical data on the author. We don't necessarily know who the audience is. So we have to make assumptions. So the author probably is really well read in the Old Testament, and that the audience is as well. Because the way in which the author is speaking about the Old Testament, they really want the audience, the person or the people group or the church, to understand that Jesus is better than the stuff that you have learned about. You grew up on this information. I want to say these stories, but I hate to make them seem like they're fables because I don't think that they are. But you grew up on these stories, right? You knew that there were angels. You knew that there was Moses. You knew that there was Joshua. And Jesus is better than all of those things. Jesus is the fulfillment of all of those stories, all of those prophecies, all of the things that you heard and learned beforehand. And this is why you need to stay in and understand these things so you do not drift away from the Lord, because drifting away from Jesus is drifting away from God. And you want to stay firmly embedded in God. And I think that this author, as many other authors have as well, we have a great responsibility not to harden our hearts when the word comes. And for some of us, we go, well, no, I believe in Jesus, right? And so there is also a hardening of hearts of a lot of conviction, right? When someone comes or you read these letters and it says, don't do these things, and you're kind of embedded and engrossed in doing these things. And you're like, well, it doesn't really mean that. Well, it doesn't necessarily say that. Well, it can be interpreted so many ways. Well, this book has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. And it's like a whisper down the lane. When we start doing all of those things and forgetting the roots, the things and where it came from, we are in trouble of drifting away from Christ. We are in trouble of drifting away from our bridge, our connection to the Lord, right? And therefore, our end may be that we are not with the Lord forever and ever eternally. So here he goes. He was talking about a high priest. And so we're going to get a little bit more of the high priest idea today. He said, for every high priest was taken from among men, is appointed for men in things pertaining to God. So when they were the Old Testament, um, high priests, and it goes into it a little bit of detail here. High priests were the sons of Aaron. So they were in that line of Aaron, who was the brother of Moses. And they were the only ones that could go into the special place, the Holy of Holies. and they were the one who would be giving your sacrifices. They were the only ones who could do that. They were appointed by men. So God said, son of Aaron, and then men would go, well, this son goes in there, right? So it was appointed by men for men. This is very particularly what it was. That is not true of all high priests. So we're going to just see, he says, he can have compassion on those who are ignorant and going astray, since he himself is also subject to weakness. Because of this, he's required, as for the people, so also for himself, to offer sacrifices for sins. So the one who has been appointed also, so he gives sacrifices for you, right, for all the people, but he also gives sacrifices for himself because he is just as human as they are. So they give sacrifices and he also gives sacrifices. That was part of his duty, was to give. Part of the sacrifice was for him to give, to atone for his sins that he committed all the time. He said, and no man takes this honor to himself, but he who was called by God, just as Aaron was. So again, it was in that line of Aaron. So also Christ didn't glorify himself. So God made this promise to Aaron that Aaron's generation, again, they were appointed based on other things, but it was only Aaron's bloodline that was to go in. This was a ruling appointed by God in the time of Moses. Christ also was called and sent by God. So both of them had their jobs essentially created by the Lord. He did not glorify himself. He didn't say, oh, this is going to be my job. I'm going to take over and I'm going to rule over all of you guys. He was given this job by the Lord. And the reason these things are important, like the reason any of this matters, is because ultimately, especially like for them, Israel followed the Lord that created. So Israel believed, whether they were good followers, bad followers, they turned away, whatever all of that might be. They followed the Lord. They understood the Lord. And so what this author is saying is this author is saying that God that you follow, remember, he appointed all the sons of Aaron. And we all went, yeah, we follow that. We understand that. We agree with that. Like we collectively as a unit all agree that the sons of Aaron were the ones that went into the temple, into the Holy of Holies. We all agree on that. Just like that, he also appointed Christ as the high priest. So now they're saying, you knew and understood and followed this. I need you now to recognize that this is the fulfillment of this, right? Like this Jesus is the fulfillment of all of that stuff that you conclusively agreed to before and lived as if it were all true. Jesus is the fulfillment of those things, also appointed by God. And that's important because God gave him this job. This was not just something he picked on his own. And he said, you are my son, today I have begotten you. And he also says, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. They're going to know the story of Melchizedek. Comes back in Genesis. So he said, who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with vehement cries into, they're talking about Jesus, when in the days of his flesh, so when he was alive, he cried out to the Lord. There was a time where he knew his time was coming. So if you have never read this before, it is in the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And so there was a time where he knew his time was coming. And he went by himself and he prayed. And when he prayed, he desperately prayed. So he prayed to the Lord. And what he prayed was, if it is your will, take this cup from me. I don't want this job. Because as a human, the job he was given was unbearable, to take on the sins of the entire world, right? And to make that payment for the entire world. He said, this is a really, I make it so small when I say it's too difficult, but I also make it, I don't want to say too big when I say he couldn't do it, because he very clearly could do it. And he honored the Lord by doing it. But I want, if you're a listener, I want you to understand the greatness of what he was asked. It is something that we couldn't do. This is why we're constantly asked to sacrifice ourselves. And we go, no, I really, like we all pretend that we do. But if you sit back and you really examine your heart and you examine yourself all the time, we do not sacrifice as much as we think we do. If someone says, I don't want you to do this. We go, well, I'm doing it anyway. And if someone says that hurts me when you do that, we go, well, I don't really care. Or like, oh, that kind of sucks, but I'm doing it anyway. Right? And it's not always honoring of the Lord. A lot of times, more often than not, it's honoring of ourselves. And so we couldn't do the thing that it is that he did. We could and probably would sacrifice for somebody that we love more than anything in this world, a spouse, a child, right? You would willingly, like a mother, right, in childbirth, would say, please, Lord, keep this baby, let me go. And I think most moms you would hear probably overwhelmingly agreeing with that. Not all, and I'm not going to say anything bad about that because we all have our own um, reasons why we would or wouldn't. But mostly, we would probably, in the throes of that moment, we would probably say, save for them whatever for me, right? I want them to live a life. But would you do it for someone who is your enemy? And Jesus did it for everyone who was his enemy. Every single person on this earth sins against the Lord. Everyone. They all hurt him. Every single one of them. Like, we all cause him pain. We cause him pain by lying. We cause him pain by cheating. We cause him pain by being selfish. We cause him pain by being a thief. We call and so, like, you can steal time. Like, there are all kinds of things that we can be a thief about. You cause him pain in so, like, looking lustfully on other people. This is how you cause the Lord pain. Any time, in any way you would cause another person pain, that causes the Lord pain. And he willingly went to the cross for us, right? And so he sacrificed. And so it says, in the days of prayer and supplication, or with prayer and supplication, he was with vehement cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, which is the Lord, and was heard because of his godly fear. Though he was a son, he learned obedience by the things in which he suffered. So even the Lord, and I want to say, like, I hear this often, like, the Lord never changes, which, like, I love and appreciate the concept, and we can say, like, that in an essence that's true, but it also says that Jesus here learned obedience. And it also says, having been perfected. So through this trial that he went through, first of all, through the first trial that he went through, he grew in that way, right? In obedience. The first trial was Satan out in the wilderness for the 40 days. And then in this trial, he was perfected. So after he went through this, he was perfected. He was sinless first. He was perfected in all of this. Having been perfected, he became the author of eternal salvation to all who obey him. So an author is an originator. He was the originator of eternal salvation. So, and I mention this, and I think it's a weird sticking point, sort of, kind of, because time looks a little bit different for us. But those who had faith before time, right, didn't have eternal salvation until this moment, until the moment that Jesus' life was taken, volunteered, given up. And then those who follow after will have eternal salvation because of that. Now, do I know what happened? Was it a blip in time for them? But, like, there's a point where we see in Samuel, I don't know if it was first or second Samuel, but where Samuel has passed and Saul called him back up. And he was like, why have you kind of taken me from my rest? And it says he came up from the ground, right? So he, like, not as a zombie, but it was like a spiritual kind of thing, at least from the way I can read it. And so he came up from the ground. So he was not in his full rest yet, because he also said that Saul would be there, which I think that Saul didn't go to a heavenly rest. He went to an eternal rest elsewhere. But, right. So I think this in some ways helps to solidify the idea that Jesus was the pivotal moment. He was the moment that all who believed before went into eternal salvation, and then all those who will believe after will go into eternal salvation. And then he says, all who obey him, called by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek, of whom we have much to say, and it's hard to explain, since you have become dull of hearing. So there is I think it's true now. There's an idea that you become immune maybe to certain things. He says dull of hearing, immune to certain things. He's like, listen, I could tell you all day about Melchizedek. There's a little blip of Melchizedek back in the Old Testament. He's like, I can tell you all day what this is and who this is, but the truth is you're not really hearing and responding to those things. I know, I always say, like, I'm in a school now, and I help in classes, and there's a theory that we have sort of made them dull of hearing. So we have what used to be, back when I was in school, they'd hand you a book, right? Like your social studies text, for example, and they would say, go in there, here are 6 questions, and fully answer all of those questions. And now they get notes that are printed out with like the question, and then the answer is like 90% completed, and all they have to do is fill in a word or two. And so I'm like, they don't even have to work for it anymore. And teachers are literally saying, if we gave them anything more challenging, they actually couldn't do the work. They are unable, because of these learned behaviors, they're actually unable at this point to step up to the plate. They have become more dull in hearing, and so it's now taking extra steps to get them to certain places that it used to be they would just kind of do those things. So he's saying, you become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again. And that's another reason why I think he's working and talking with like ancient Israelites, because they should have known the Old Testament back and forth, and they should have been able to teach the Gentiles. That was in some ways like their job. So once it was open to the Gentiles, who was going to teach the Gentiles all of the information from the Lord back through what we call the Old Testament? They would have called the Torah, right? So who was there to teach them that? If it wasn't them, they should have been teachers of all of this. It shouldn't have been left to just Paul. They were experienced long-term followers of the Lord, and they weren't able, because they had forgotten so much, they weren't able to even be able to teach anybody else. They had gone back to the milk instead of being in the meat. He said, you have come to need milk and not solid food. For everyone who partakes of only milk is unskilled in the world, in the word of righteousness. He's a baby. So because you don't even understand how Jesus was greater than the angels, Moses and Joshua, like, you're back in the milk. This should have been something that the moment you saw it, you went, oh my gosh, this is the fulfillment. This is what the Lord had been showing us for 3,000 years. We should have known. We should have understood. And he said, now you're babe. But solid food belongs to those who are of full age. So no matter what your age is, no matter how long you've been at church, if you don't fully grasp on these understandings, you are still a baby in the word. And I'm going to say that I would like to say that most of us don't want to be babies in the word, right? Most of us, we've been called to share of the gospel. How can you share if you're only in the milk? You're still a baby. How can you teach another person how to walk if you are crawling? You're unable to do so. You can't give anyone meat because you're still in milk. So how could you can barely give them milk, let alone give them meat? And you should be in meat. And that's the call out. That's the thing that should really convict us. Is as if we have been a believer for a certain amount of time. And I'm going to throw out a time, and it's certainly not an exact science. 4 years, 8 years, 12 years, 20 years, 50 years. It really shouldn't be someone saying, I have never read my scripture, or I read the Old Testament or the New Testament. That shouldn't be the case. You are still in milk, or I just participate in church on Sunday mornings. Like, what? That's just as good. I get all of my information when I go there on Sunday morning. I've been going there on Sunday morning for the past 50 years. That is not acceptable as far as our understanding goes in the Lord. And he said, that is who by reason of us, sorry, but solid food belongs to those who are of full age. That is, those who by reason of use have their senses exercised, like exercise to work out, to discern both good and evil. That is your ability when you are more in the word, when you are in the meat. You have the ability to discern good versus evil, which in this day and age, when he was writing, she, the author, when this author was writing, this was absolutely imperative. And the reason I say, because it hasn't changed, it's absolutely imperative now. When Jesus came back, the people he yelled at the most were not strangers, were not outsiders. were the Pharisees. They were the people who he yelled at the most because they were supposed to be the ones in the meat and they were still in the milk, and they were giving evil information because they did not understand the truth in which they were preaching. That's messed up. We're still exactly the same way. They were the same way here. In this, people would come in and they would be like, well, Jesus is just some guy. Jesus is just a human who lived. Jesus didn't really die on the cross. Jesus isn't really fully God. Jesus wasn't really fully man. If he was fully man, he couldn't have been fully God. If he was fully God, he couldn't have been fully man. There are so many things that they said, well, grace isn't really grace. Well, the law isn't, we don't really have to do anything. We can just sit back because there are so many promises that people want to tell you that make life easier and make you in some ways bound to them more than bound to Christ, right? Because then you're bound to your own freedoms, you're bound to your own desires, you're bound to your own lusts, and that's what takes you right down back into the devil, and it keeps you from being bound to Christ, which is exactly what we want to be. And so we need to be just as discerning. We're the first people who want to condemn the Pharisees. Can you believe that they believe this? Or we go, well, that probably would have been me too. Both of those answers really leave us in a quandary of, are we really growing in the Lord? Right? Because if you're condemning them, you probably don't recognize that you have that same thing inside of you. If you're saying, well, that's me also, you're not being exhorted enough, or you're not condemning your own sin enough to recognize that this shouldn't be you, right? Like, oh, it is me, but it shouldn't be me, right? Like there's this fine line of going, I'm not better than the Pharisees, but I pray that the Lord gives me more information so I learn from the Pharisees and I don't do the things that they do, or I do it as little as possible. So that's where I'm ending for today. And I hope you guys were able to stick with me. If you have, I want you to like, share, subscribe to the channel, and I will see you guys next time.